So, has anyone seen the 1982 movie Conan the Barbarian? Today we're going to talk about Conan the Barbarian, and I promise it has everything to do with guitar building. So, the movie opens with a blacksmith making a sword. It's Conan's dad. He's a pretty good blacksmith. And a few scenes later, Conan's dad is talking to Conan about the importance of steel to his culture and his people. He also briefly mentions the Riddle of Steel, which will come into play later. A few scenes later, Thulsa Doom comes to raid the village. Thulsa Doom is an ancient wizard who spends his time basically pillaging villages in search for steel. He's also the leader of a snake cult. In any case, poor Conan's dad is slain, his sword is stolen, and with that very same sword, Thulsa Doom slays Conan's mom right before his eyes. Conan never forgets this. Conan remembers that imagery and he takes it with him for the rest of his life. Anyway, Conan's taken to the Wheel of Pain where he grows up and becomes a man, etc., etc. But it isn't until later, when he acquires a set of skills in order to enact his revenge, that he actually puts a plan forward and he goes to Thulsa Doom's palace to really just to kill him. But his plot fails, and he's captured by Thulsa Doom and his lieutenants. There on the floor, Conan's bleeding, surrounded by Thulsa Doom's followers, his lieutenants. Conan says, "You stole my father's sword." And Thulsa Doom's expression and his response is timeless. He obviously doesn't remember Conan's dad or the sword because he killed so many men. He raided so many villages and he stole so much steel. But he still smiles and he says, "In my youth, I sought after steel." And that's really the most important line in this whole story. Thulsa Doom then hears Conan say, "The Riddle of Steel." And Thulsa Doom smiles again. He says, "Yes, the Riddle of Steel. Shall I tell you what the answer is?" "Of course. You're dying. I'm going to give you the answer." And Thulsa Doom says, "Steel is not strong. Flesh is. What is steel compared to the hand that wields it? Look at your strength. Look at the desire in your heart. That is strength." So the takeaway here is essentially guitar players, guitar builders, always in search for those perfect tones, those perfect materials, those perfect tools, when really that quest is going to end with a certain form of enlightenment, which is tone doesn't come from things, it comes from your hands. The tools don't matter, it's the hands that wield them. The materials don't matter, none of that matters. But you can't tell that to people, that's a pretty divisive thing to say. If a man climbed to the top of a mountain, to the summit, and then went back down and saw many other men climbing that same mountain, and he told them, "The summit's not going to give you happiness or joy. Joy and happiness can be found at base camp by the campfire and your friends." They wouldn't listen to him, right? They're going to have to follow their own path. They have to follow their own quest. They have to reach the summit. And only then will they reach some kind of enlightenment or realization that it really doesn't matter. So I came to some crossroads in my life. I sought after tone. I have the guitar collection to prove it. I have the pedals and the gear to prove it. And in the end, I realized it didn't matter. So now here we are in the build, and I need to decide things like, well, what material of nut am I going to use? What brand of tuners? What brand of bridge? And it doesn't matter. In the end, it doesn't matter. Anyway, the Riddle of Steel is a metaphor, and you can apply it to pretty much everything in life, right? The riddle of tone, right? The riddle of tools, the riddle of guitar building. It's all the same. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we have so far. Let's build a nut. Let's modify a hardtail guitar bridge for top loading. Let's hop on the CNC. Come on. An alternative to building these keyholes, if you don't have a CNC, is just to simply drill like a little 2mm hole here all the way through, and then use like a milling machine or like a Dremel even to take small passes off all the way into the center of the hole until you're all the way through. And you just keep on doing that. And I think that would be a much quicker way of building these keyholes than what I did, which was to design all this in CAD and then put it on the CNC table. And my dimensions are off, so this keyhole here is much shorter, And this one, this is where it started. So my angle of degree was off. But again, it doesn't matter. It works. The keyholes work perfectly. You can stick them in and they engage and they lock in place. Even the shortest one here at the end, you put it in, it locks in place. And I even tested this. So I flip this around. I put it in the short one here, the short keyhole. Put it in, it locks in place very nicely. So I can pull it forwards and it engages and locks, and I can pull it straight up too. And it doesn't disengage. It doesn't disengage till I pull backwards. But right there. So this is going to work out exactly the way I wanted. Okay, so converting a hardtail bridge to top-loading keyhole. That's it. You could easily do this with just a Dremel tool, I'm sure. All right, you're going to think I'm super silly, but I ended up abandoning the Graphtec nut in favor of using bone. So this bone nut was made in the exact same manner as the Graphtec you just saw. Same process exactly. I took a bone nut blank, taped it on the table, and ran my machining tool paths to build this. The only difference you're seeing here is after it comes off the table, it's still a rectangle. And what I do is I put in that slope by hand and I grind off this bevel here. And then I simply just sand and sand and sand, go through the grits until I get it to be smooth. And I don't bother polishing, so I'll go up to like a 2000 grit on these bone nuts. But if you go any further, it starts to look like plastic. So these bison bone blanks that I buy are unbleached, so there's quite a bit of color in them. There are some tans and khakis and some milky whites, but it's not a uniform color. Obviously, these slots here are made on the CNC and they're for accuracy, right? They're not meant to be used just like this. I have to go with my nut slot files to actually get them to the right depth, which is what I'm going to do later. And I abandoned the Graphtec simply because of 2 comments. I mean, 2 people commented, hey, use bone, and that's all it took. I initially chose to use the Graphtec simply for the color, right? I wanted it to be black. That was it. So it didn't take much to push me over the fence and use bone. In the end, it doesn't matter, right? I was always thinking about my conversation about the riddle of tone and whether I'm using Graphtec or bone. The differences are negligible. And we've all seen Paul Reed Smith do that drop test, right? You ever see Paul Reed Smith do the drop thing where he drops a plastic nut and, I don't know, some other material nuts? I get it, right? I get that tone is reductive and we don't want to use plastic. In the end, for me, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm going to use bone just because it was suggested, and I have so many bone blanks. Okay, I just want to let you know that we're now on to bone. Let's move on. So not doing anything fancy here. I have lines marked for the 25 to 26 inch scale length, so I can move this back and forth as needed. And I can also ensure that it is square to the actual saddles there. Obviously this is going to be slanted. And then I can pull it back or forward wherever I want. And that's all I'm doing there. And I can pull these strings taut if I need to. The weight of the bridge alone keeps them nice and tight. So I'll be sure that we have the proper spacing for the string to the edge of the fretboard on both sides, and I'll just move this bridge accordingly and then kind of plot in with a marker where I need those points to be for the hardware to go into the wood. So typically, in most of my builds, I'll model out this entire bridge in CAD, so I know exactly where the hole placements need to be. And then I'll model the holes and then machine those holes when the guitar is on the actual CNC table. But because I had no clue whether I was going to be using hardtail or a headless design, I didn't do that, so I have to do this manually. I'm going to make sure everything is lined up, and then I'm just going to put little dots here where these holes should go. So I'm just going to do that real quick. So I guess the 1/16 would be fine for drilling the pilot holes for these screws. Yeah, that should be fine. That's just a 1/16 bit. The holes lined up really nicely. Now for the keyholes, I need to actually find the center of the end of the keyhole and the actual ball end part. So when I find the center of that, then I'll drill a pretty large hole. That way we have room for that ball end of the string to go in there and latch onto that keyhole. So I just have to clean these little holes up. There's a lot of little wood fiber hairs sticking out. Not that anyone's gonna ever see this, but I'll go in there with some sandpaper and clean it up, and I might even seal this with some like shellac or something too. But again, no one's gonna see any of these, and hard to get a good angle here. I'm trying to get one. But the keyholes work really well. So the keyhole goes in, and then gets locked in the keyhole like that. So now the only question is, will the string break? Because it's going to be leaning against the sharp edge of that bridge metal. It could easily cut it and snap. We'll see. All right, so the keyhole design of the bridge was a pretty clever idea, at least I thought, but it's not going to work. The keyholes themselves work, everything works. What's not working, and what I didn't account for, is the winding for the ball end of the string. So the winding for the ball end of the string actually goes pretty far these days. Maybe in recent years they've gotten longer, but they go pretty far. And what's happening is, on the high strings, the winding for that ball end is falling right on the saddle tip, right? So it's falling, you can't see this. It's falling right there where the string should be sitting on the saddle, but it's actually wind that's sitting on there. So what I'm gonna do is remove the bridge, and I'm gonna plug the holes with some dowels. This is oak, it's really strong, and it's the exact same dimension as the keyhole holes that I added. And then the screw holes to mount the bridge, I'll plug those too. Re-sand and refinish that portion there. And then we'll use a different bridge. So this sets me back about a week. It's unfortunate. I guess another way you could have done it is to push the saddle further this way, meaning if you mounted the bridge further back and move the saddles forward, then you could bypass. Yeah, that would work totally. But I have designed this bridge here in the back to be perfectly aligned with this bridge, meaning if I go further back, it's going to float off this ledge, and that wouldn't look cool. So for anyone who's willing to try modifying a hardtail bridge with keyhole design, it would work if you were willing to push the bridge slightly back, move the saddle slightly forward, then you could actually avoid having those ball end threads on the saddles. All right, total bummer. I'm not disappointed though. I'm kind of happy. So let's get rid of the bridge. Let's plug the holes, plug all the pilot holes too for the screws, and put a new bridge on. All right, so one more issue that I've run into, it seems I have painted myself into a corner, is when it comes to strap buttons or strap pegs, I don't have any room for the one that goes on the horn. So this is a pretty sharp point here, and I'm pretty positive that I won't be able to drill through there and add a button there. And there's not a lot of room here either. So even if I decided to put one, like say here, I don't feel like there's enough wood there to really support it. And I don't know if there's enough of a space here to support the diameter of a strap button. And this is a facet here, so I can't do anything this way unless I'm willing to drill at an angle. So I'm not really sure what to do, and I'm gonna probably need your help. Anything beneath this, I don't think I can put anything under there. And it's just the way I designed this. There's a little bit more meat here. From this camera view, it looks fine, but from where I'm sitting, it does not. See if I can get a better angle. This is not a better angle, but I wish they made smaller strap buttons that flared out. Then I could kind of use this portion. I've seen some Super Strats, like Ibanez and Jackson's, that have really sharp horns, like sharper than this, where they do put buttons at the tip. I'm not willing to do that. It throws off the lines and the look anyway. I hate strap pegs that are on the back of the horn. I wear my guitar really high, and if you're using strap locks, they stick out quite a bit, and this will hit you in the chest. But I have no choice. Again, I painted myself into a corner. The heel also is definitely a no. So that's what we have for this week. That's the build so far. I'm not going to show the rest of the assembly and setup. That's all boring and you've seen it 1,000 times, and I don't do anything different than anyone else. What I want to show you are things that you haven't seen before, like making a nut on a CNC or adding keyholes to a hardtail bridge. Those are probably things you haven't seen. I think I'm going to use next week to not only just do setup and assembly, but also start writing a demo. That way we can actually hear what this sounds like. I might actually just do some demo in here. Just bring the guitar and a laptop and play a few riffs. That actually might work too. But I do like to have a finished track also. So I'll start working on that next week. There may be a video next week, there may not be. We'll see. Depends on how I feel. In any case, thanks for watching. Take it easy.